Great. Welcome to User Experience Design in Organizations. I hope your week is a good week. Tuesday and it's going fast. I have a feeling February is going to run by us very, very quickly when we look at everything that we have to do for this class, particularly. And I know you have more than this class, but I'm happy to see how involved you have been involved. And I think I received all the sign NDAs at this point, so thank you so much. But it's really good to see the momentum and see the folders being created and everybody in the different documents. So tomorrow we're going to talk more about the project and the labs, but thank you for being involved, and then thank you for everybody who's been helping with the project and the plan and the activities and the folder and the system. So I see the conversation are happening with Roots too, which is pretty good. And I did spend some time this morning doing some research on my own, but I do this to help you and try to see if we can get as many answers on our own where we can, so that we can keep going. But so welcome, and I hope you'll have a good week. So we're together, and then we'll be together as well tomorrow. So today we're really going to be talking about our topics. So we will talk more about structures. We will talk more about topics. Last week we talked about organizational behavior and how important it is in a business. But I'm really hoping today that we are going to be able to cover the types of businesses, and then also talk about structure as well. We still have a lot of content, but let's see how far we get. Are there any questions about any of the topics or the topics so far? Okay, so if there are, you guys are welcome to ask a question as we are live, or you're welcome, obviously, to send a course message. And I did connect with some of you last week. I got some feedback, so the feedback is very welcome, very helpful for me to structure and make sure that you understand what is expected, and also what is happening and what's coming to at us as well. So hence the project plan and trying to get more details. So today we're going to talk about organizational types and structure and how they impact our work, how they impact us in businesses. I had a little note to talk about Lucy. I don't know if you had a chance to look at my notes and Lucy's answers. I don't think we will spend much time today because I would really like to go through the topics, but there's no rush. But Lucy, I think, is good to set up some of the challenges or some of the things that we should be paying attention in this class, with Roots as well, to avoid to do some of the things that she's done. But she's not a bad person, and Rogers either. Sometimes it's really personality, and then going in and not having necessarily paid attention to some elements that I'm trying to point out in the journal and the reflective journal for you as well, so that we can start thinking through the lens of Lucy's. And I invite you to look at the responses that I provided, and then hopefully at some point we'll have soon we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about Lucy. But I think she's a good example of things to do and things not to do. But obviously she had no intention, and I don't think anybody had bad intention at Rogers. You are going to learn that businesses are personalities, and sometimes we fit, sometimes we don't, and at some point it's up to us to make a decision to stay or to continue. But I think she did some good things, and I'm sure she's learned for her next jobs as well. So when we think of organizational types, there are multiple ways of dividing up businesses. There's not one way. And so when I created this content, I had to make choices. But really, and I can see how it may be confusing or difficult for you to really trying to differentiate, like when we say organization, what is the structure? What is an organizational type or a type? What is culture? And then what is value? And then what are the people? And how is this all comes together? And how can we put lines? Sometimes it's really difficult because everything is all connected. But I'm trying to give you, through the types, maybe some ways that you can start dividing up businesses, so that when you start thinking about where do I feel I will fit the best as me as a person, based on what I know, based on what I do from all those years as an individual, but then also what I have learned in school, what I have learned from other people in businesses. So these are more like things for you to consider when you're going to be actively looking at the end of the program for that job, or even if you're working part-time now, maybe this is not where you want to be for the rest of your day, your time. So take this as indicator or things for you to consider, almost like a checklist. When you think of a business and when you think of who you're going to be applying to as well, what you should be paying attention, and then sharing with you what we know and what people have shared and what people have learned that may be more connected to you as a person. So in terms of when we say organization types, you're probably going to hear of two types: public or private. And I will share with you some stats. The public is probably known as very formal because they have stakeholders, they have people that are investing, right, in businesses. So they have a lot of people making decisions. So they tend to be very, very transparent. They have no choice to show the budgets. They have no choice to show how much the CEO is making because they have investor, and an investor can be you, can be me buying stock options, or we have RSPs that also sometimes are connected to some of those public businesses. So they tend to be more formal, and as they have more structure, we're going to learn about what is the structure, what makes up the structure. They definitely have to have objectives because they have plans, and they have to report on if they've met their objective, if they haven't met their objective. And it's very, very specific, where if you're in the private sector, you don't have to say how much the president is making and how good you are and how much money you're losing and how much money you're not losing or you're making and how much profit, because no one is expecting dividends because you own the business. So there's a huge differences, and there's some good and some bad. The public sector tends to be a very hierarchical, top down. There's hierarchy. Oh my God. Teaching information architecture for hierarchy structure. I had so much fun last week. So because I have a hard time to pronounce that little word, but they tend to be very like top. So the CEO has VP and director, and then everybody has a direct line of reporting. And but then, as I share with you, there's that formal org chart that you will see, but then there's the informal, and Sarah has said the corridor discussion. But they tend to be very, very top down as well. So that is the public, and you're often going to think of public as the government as well. Government services, citizen services, so that are the taxpayer are actually funding as a service. But public also, you think of Rogers, who's publicly owned by investor. Think of Air Canada. Think of those businesses. They are in the public sector as well. In the private sector, so this is family owned, this is the small businesses, family owned, they can do pretty much what they want. They don't necessarily have anybody who's looking at their books, except when it looks at income, taxes, and dues in terms of those fees. But they don't have to give as much transparency because they don't have anybody who's looking at over their shoulder. They don't have the investor. There you're going to see a mix of some are formal, some are not as informal, some are more informal. When we hear informal, you're going to hear lack of structure. They don't necessarily have structure. Now we're going to learn what is that. The lack of objectives. Maybe they have lack of hierarchy. It's flat. It's not really clear who's doing what and the roles and the responsibility. And Sarah told us last week in her research that clear roles, definition, responsibility, and having the right people is very, very important. But you will see that in the informal businesses or private sector, sometimes that is not always the case. Now, you will see that often the private sector will be very precise as well. So in terms of employee, in terms of product or services, skills, or even locations where they are. So public, often the public sector will have been in place for a very long time, and they will have been successful, they will have grown, they'll be worldwide. In the private, you may have maybe one offices, you may be in one location. So you're going to see a lot of variations, but of course, you can have a private sector who's very, very formal, that has all the structure and all the objectives and vice versa, and not necessarily be public. You're going to say mix and match, but somewhere I have to give you a bit of a framework, but you will see that some businesses sometime, when you look at them, and you will experience that, you may go to a public business like Rogers, but you may find that sometimes they don't have the structure, as much structure, versus if you were going to an Air Canada. So don't think that all public sector are all very structured. Sometimes it's chaotic too. So you will see that. But at least you may think, or you may presume, that you may see more structure in the public sector for the reasons that they're public versus the private sector. But you may have some public businesses like Rogers that are trying to be more flat, not have as much top down, have more conversation. If you remember Lucy, though, she was facing that she was only allowed to talk to other directors and then managers only to managers. So that is hierarchy, and that is very difficult for communication and be able to be multidisciplinary on the fly quick today when you have to go all through these layers. And that's part of also the structure, and that is an obstacle to good communication. Are there any questions about the two main types or anything as it relates to public or private so far?
None for me so far.
Okay, great. Is that a bit of, is this a division you've heard? Obviously, you've heard of public and private, and now we're also touching on formal and informal. Are there any surprises or anything that you think that maybe is missing so far with the two main division that I've shared? If there is, then you're welcome to share your vision as well. That's okay. So here I have put a little table for you, again, to give you a little bit of sense of how they may be different on certain areas. I have put a link to some of the data sources. So the public sector, 20% of employees in Canada, and the source, I have provided a link to the source, will be in the public sector. So that means the rest will be either in private, nonprofit, or self-employed. So 2/3 will be in the private sector. So that's pretty high. But then it doesn't mean anything about business sizes. So of those businesses, so 20% may seem to be a small number, but in terms of the businesses, it might be very, very large in terms of businesses. The nonprofit sector and the self-employed will fall within the rest of outside of the 20%. I don't necessarily have the split, and I don't think it was necessarily available. And there's a piece of data that says about 1/5 have a precarious job. So what is a precarious job? So that means I work part-time, I work contract, or I have little stability as well. So you're often going to have or hear that you have the option to be a full-time permanent employee, permanent, or you can also be a part-time, and you can be on the payroll. So you can be, as an HR employee, your status could be permanent, full-time, or part-time employee as well, and you're on the payroll, and then you consider like an employee, and they're collecting money from you for your income tax. Where if you're in contract, if you're on your own, if you're freelance, self-employed, then you're going to be on your own, and no one is collecting, but you will have to pay your due. So when you think of, now we're going to look at the public sector. Often you're going to see the federal or government agencies, provincial agencies that are anybody who works for provincial, the local agencies as well that help the government, or agencies as well related to government. But you're also going to have there the Rogers and the Air Canada that are owned by the shareholder, by the stockholder. And then typically they tend to be established unless you were a startup, and then you had a brilliant idea. And Zoom, if we think of Zoom is not necessarily a very old business, but with pandemic, they've grew. I don't know by which percentages, but they were at one point, and not that long ago, they were a startup. And then pandemic came, and they grew, and pretty much everybody knows about Zoom and they've been using, and I don't even know if they're public or not, and I should know that. But if they're not, maybe this is going to be the next step for them. So now they're growing very fast, and what you will see from startups, the growth and the pain of growth can be very, very painful and very difficult for employees in place, particularly because they go from informal to no structure to now they have to become more formal and more structured, and some people don't do well in that setup. So back to the public sector, government owned very often in older technologies. So why did I put older technology? As I said, businesses that tend to be established and been long enough, they will have legacy technology. So you may not necessarily have the best offices, the best desks, the best computer. So again, I'm not saying that all businesses are in public, but they might be very large, and to be able to have the nicest and the latest technology and computer, it might take more time. And if it's not in place, then maybe it's not even on their plan to move to better technology. But when I look at Rogers, we've transformed and we've actually changed the layout in the buildings, and we've changed the setup and how people sit to refresh our look, to refresh our offices. We've learned, and some research have shown that that will help employees to actually stay and employees to feel happier with the brand as well. And then they will feel proud, and they will actually feel better psychologically and better organized. And I think it just goes with order and are wanting to have order and wanting to be in a nice place and have effective tools. So in terms of, I put the little parentheses or brackets for structure. We're going to talk more about structure, but it was more to think about the structure elements for public sector will be probably very different than the one in the public sector and the nonprofit. We're going to talk more about structure soon. So public sector usually will probably give you more job security. So they've been established. They're very, very serious about who they hire and when they hire, and they have the stakeholder. So they can't just hire because they want to hire. If they want to hire a lot of people, often they will need to have their approval as well. So the board or the decision or the people that are on the board, the direction, the board of directors will have to approve budget increases or hiring, or and versus the private sector, it may just be the owner. So when you see that they're hiring, they've done a lot more homework and a lot more due diligence, and they're not necessarily hiring because of growth, sudden growth like a Zoom. So it's not as risky. So more job security, maybe benefits. Now with benefits will vary, and I think a slide that talks a little bit about more the benefits, but they may have good or not as good, but everybody will have hopefully some benefits. But that is probably the piece where you're going to need to be very interested in. You're going to be negotiating as well. Benefits can be work from home. Benefits can be wear jeans. Benefits can be volunteer days. Maybe a benefit for you is flexible hours and schedule. If you're at the government, you're not going to, but again, depending on where and which department of the government, but it's pretty much 9 to 5. So think of that. Where the startup, the private sector, the digital agencies, the UX business, the agencies, the web agencies, often they will have very flexible working hours. They'll have gene policy, and but then now more and more public sector or bigger organization will have, let's say, Friday jeans, so that you can actually wear jeans on Friday, but you have to pay $5. Pension, often the public sector will come with pension. Defined pension or predefined pension, and there are multiple things there that eventually you learn in your career. You will see maybe unionized as well environment in the public sector. Something for you to think about. If you think of Humber is unionized as well, and I think Humber is public. And then you have, but it's a benefit. There are benefits with having unions as well for when you need support or you have some challenges with your own employer. But hopefully this is not going to be something that most of you will have to go through. It's exception based, I hope. As I said, 9 to 5, and then what they've shown as well is the salary, the piece of salary. So the salary tend to be higher in terms of the public sector, which actually I was surprised when I built this class for you. It tends to be higher in the public sector, but I think what they factor in is all the benefits that come with it as well, by 10% versus the other business type as well. So this is for you. You're gonna have to think about more money, not more money, benefits, and rigidity, formality, or the lack of the flexibility maybe that you may have. But these are things you will know only when you speak to them. But when you speak to a government agency, you should expect these items to be more in place versus the private sector. So if we move on to private sector now, you're going to have small, medium-sized, larger business in the private sector. Again, it will come in all combination. But 2/3 of employees, there are employees, actually work in the private sector. So it is the area where most people actually work here in Canada. Some of them can be very well established, and some of them may not be as well established. They just may not be publicly owned. So Sunwing is one of them. So Sunwing is in the private sector. It was owned by the founder. It's a family business, but then it's owned at 51% by a big company in the UK called TUE, which I think are public. So they have their family owned, their private sector, but they have almost half of their assets or half of the company is owned by another entity. So they have flexibility, but they also have areas where they need to report on their business and their performance. But Sunwing does not have to report how much the CEO is making to the general public, but the TUE and the investors that are at TUE probably know, and they need to know because they're funding and they're very interested in how Sunwing is doing and how Sunwing is performing. Now, in this category, you're going to have the startups. So you're going to have startups and companies that have these brilliant ideas that are still trying to even build their business and their business ideas. They're still trying to get people to invest in their business. So you're going to work for startups. You have less job security. That's a fact. And actually, 60% of them failed. So that does not mean that you should stay away from startups, but you need to be prepared to be operating very differently than if you were in the 9-to-5 environment. They tend to have, some of them will tend to have newer technology, but that does not mean that a Sunwing has all the best technology. The computers of the call center rep were brutal and terrible at Sunwing. I would go there and do call listening. If I open a parenthesis, as UX expert, if you work for a business that have a call center, you should be spending so much time there because you hear customer calling. In fact, maybe one of you should make a note and ask Roots if there's a way for us to do some call listening, or for anybody to do some call listening and listen in customer calling in and see what kind of questions they have. It's so insightful. I do that in all jobs that I have gone, and I have found so many opportunities, because what happened is you see the agent and you're doing a few things. You're listening to consumer words, label the things they say, and then you see the agent and you see all the post-its, you see the notes that they have, you see the steps that they have to do to be able to answer a customer question. That is part of task analysis. That is like ethnography. So you're getting a lot of insight at once, and you will discover opportunities very quickly. So maybe one of us make a note to see with Roots if we can actually listen to call center. Sometimes there's a way to do it remotely, or they can send us, thank you, Sarah, they can send us some recording as well. So it's really good. And here's what it does to the staff, and here's how it will help you. It helps people to understand what it is that you do, and then it helps you to connect with the staff. It helps you to connect with the call center manager, because you're going to need to get permission with them, so to be able to listen. So you're connecting, building relationships. You're actually showing that you care. You're showing that you want to add value. You want to help them, and that's how you position it. When you go and listen to the call center, and they'll be very nervous, you will tell them, we're doing this. I want to do this for a few things. I want to see if there are things that I can do online, because you're going to say, I manage the online website. I want to see if there are things that we can do to improve the website for you, to improve your experience. But you're also very interested in hearing the customer and hearing the customer words that they use. Like, think of building IAs. We do cart sorting to use what people to align with their mental model. Those words will help you to think about that. So it's very powerful. Closing the parenthesis. So in the last row for private sector, they will vary very much in terms of structure. We're going to talk about structure. But the benefits, work from home, vacations, casual, work in jeans as well, and the pension. So they may still have a pension, but it may actually vary according to business size and maturity level of the business. So that is something that you will need to be careful with. But at Sunwing, I had a pension plan. Even though they were private sector, I had a pension plan, and they would match. So what do I mean by match? I put 2% of my salary. Sunwing would put 1% of what I have put in. So that is an example of matching. But you can still get pension at a private sector. Some may be unionized. Our flight attendants were unionized. So some profession will be unionized within, but me as a staff, I was not unionized. And then the work hours may vary as well. As a startup, be prepared to work very long hours. If you work for a startup, remember, this is a business. It's a business, and they expect people to come and treat their business as your own business. As a new business, it's 24/7. So it's very fast-paced, fast-moving, and often they're very flat. And that means that you can do anything, you can learn a lot, and I will share more insight about them specifically. So private sector, so far we talk about the public, we talk about the private sector, and then the nonprofit. So nonprofit often will be cause. So if you care for a cause and you want to work for a cause, this is probably the place to be. It doesn't mean that the private sector is not going to work for a cause. Some businesses, if you're very environmental, some businesses will do environmental friendly devices to save energy and save. So there are ways to work for private sector or even public sector that have a cause feeling to them attached to them. But typically, nonprofit, you often hear about cause, small to mid-size, and I would say they're probably the closest to government because some of them may actually also be government related. So they're interesting. I've never worked for nonprofit. I have always worked for either private sector or public sector. Now, the nonprofit, they may be very well established. Think of Diabetes Association, Hearts Association, all these associations are trying to help people that have challenges, health challenges. It may also be some recent cause. So you may have something happening, and then there's a new nonprofit that will show up to support causes. You may have a startup feel as well. And what do I mean by this? Although they may be established, the line in the hierarchy may not be as defined, or you may have more flexibility to touch on many areas in the business and not just do what you've been hired for. They may also have older technology. Now, if they're starting, then you're probably going to have hopefully new technology, or you're just going to be borrowing someone else's technology who has actually maybe upgraded to something better. So you may inherit bad technology. There, you would need to do some investigation on your own. In terms of structure, we'll talk more about structure. Benefits, I'm sure you have benefits. There are pensions as well. Your work hours will, I believe, will vary in the role that you're in, and will vary probably the size of the organization and the maturity level that they are. And some are also unionized. Now, the self-employed and the freelancing, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Obviously, this is you by yourself. So you're not part of a business. You are it. You are your own business. So this is where you've heard me be freelancing. Some of those freelancers may have been doing this for years, for 20, 30 years. What you will find is a lot of us start in our career public or in the private sector. You're employed. And then eventually you come to a point in your career that you feel that maybe you want to try to do freelancing and self-employed. Or maybe your employer decided that he was do some restructuring and it was time for you to say goodbye and thank you. And then at that point you say, you know what, I'm going to try to do freelancing. So I would bet that probably half of the class will at some point do freelancing. In their career, you may do it at the beginning, you may do it in the middle, you may do it towards retirement. Well, if you think of me, I've been working full time for businesses for a long time, since I would say since 1994. And now I'm in a contract. I'm in contract with Humber, but I'm self-employed with another university as well. So I'm pretty much in the self-employed category, or I'm in a hybrid or in between. But my career primarily has been in security, job security. But mind you, your job, everybody else, there's always someone who wants your job. So there's no such job security. But you have more job security on the left-hand side than you will have as a self-employed. And some of them will be startups. So I'm a startup, self-employed. I would say I've got my newest piece in technology and technology and Wi-Fi. And I think that technology has gone lighter when you think of self-employed, but even for businesses now. We are using our own technology, our own computer, our own internet. So Humber does not need to be providing all of this, but you still have the teacher and the teaching. So I think the technology overhead is actually shrinking with the years. You're on your own. You have all the flexible hours that you want, but I would say it's a 24/7 job, because when you do the work, you also have to think about your next work, your next customer, your next client. There's no job security, but unless you have some very good clients that you know that will give you work on a regular basis, obviously no pension plan, so you are it. But there's some income benefits. You're going to save money. You can expense some of your rent, some of your condo, some of your internet. And it's a 24-hour though, but you have it's up to you to find a balance and decide that it's time to close the books. If you're like me, the books are open all the time. But don't use me as a reference. You're young. You're at the beginning of your career. You're going to need to find a balance and then make choices of where you want to go. But maybe you want to explore each of these areas as well as an option. So these, what you need to think about. So I was trying to give you some things to pay attention to or consider. But there will be other factors that you need to consider as well, right? The salary. So what is the salary and how much do you want? And we've learned that some sector will pay more than other sector. Actually, some industry will also pay more than other. The travel industry is not the industry known to pay the most, but they rely on their perks, on the travel perks. I used to travel all the time when I was at Air Canada, a little at Sunwing for work, but at Air Canada vacations, I could go anywhere on the weekend when I felt, because I had access to the travel and the hotel. B2C versus B2B products as well. So in this program, I'm sure you heard of B2C, business to business. Some of you may actually really be more inclined to work with consumer. Some of you may actually be okay with business to business. So personally, I prefer the B2C because I like the consumer element, but I've learned that the B2B can fun as well. And B2B does not mean technology. B2B may mean that your user are marketing specialists, or your user are user experience specialists, your user are analytics specialists. So it's just a different set of user. But there was a time where B2B was very tied to software, databases, and technology and hardware in this, which now has very much evolved. But something for you to consider. You may actually, some of you may be bored in the B2B. Maybe you're more in the B2C consumer. And then the speed of decision making as well. So is another important factor. I would say the decision making may be slower in the public sector, also in the private sector, both combined, but it will depend on the size of businesses and on the hierarchy and the structure, which is our next topic. And retirement, but you're not yet at all at the stage where you're thinking about retirement, but it will come. So you should think about is there an option that will give you better visibility on what retirement could look like. And the self-employed will be a very difficult one to have visibility. But I would say public and the private sector, and I would say nonprofit, is probably, you'll find rooms, or you'll find room to be able to think of what a retirement may look like for you as well as individuals. So are there any questions or anything here that you haven't seen that you think that we could discuss, or that you've heard, or any questions about my experience in any of any businesses that I have been? I've seen many, and that you would like to ask. If you do, reach out, and I think now I have included more slides that talks a bit more about details of each one. So more details about startup, what you should expect in the startup, okay? And what is maybe not so good about the startup. And this is based on what I have seen from reading, or this is based also on experience, or what I have known from other people that have experience. So there are a lot of advantages with the startups. Maybe what's not so good is if you go into a startup and thinking that you like because it's small, flat, and it's informal somehow, and you can do a lot of things, a startup may actually end up being acquired. A startup may become public, and now that means they're growing, and you're pretty much going to lose everything, a lot of what you had access to. So there'll be a lot of changes. You may not be prepared. You may have to make a decision. The workload is very heavy. You don't necessarily make the salaries are not the highest. We've seen that the highest will be in the public sector. There's not necessarily clear authority, and then uh, the owners are very, very engaged, and often people will go to the owner. And then that means it doesn't matter if you're good as an expert. Someone may actually not like what your recommendation. They may just run to the owner, and then the owner will override decisions. And that can be very, very frustrating as well. So something to consider. Organizations that are a nonprofit, then they're not so good. Again, they all have advantages. Maybe the things you may want to consider, they managed by a board of directors. So all the board of directors, they are actually the people, think of them as the one owning the business. They want funds, fundraising. So if you're not comfortable fundraising and trying to find ways to actually get money to a business organization, you're not going to be happy there, because it's really much all about fundraising. Building relationship, building fundraising, and building opportunities. Some have a public government feel to them, and they probably, a lot of them will use old technology, furniture, low budgets. And this is pretty much it for some of the things that I wanted to surface about these two types. But it does not mean that you should not consider. So really the question for you is, which organization type should you choose? So it really depends on what a good job means to you. So Sarah said, businesses, in terms of organizational behavior cares about people having the right people, the skills, the skill set, where do they fit, and what the role is and structure, and then the job responsibility, accountability, feeling fulfilled, feeling happy, feeling appreciated. So all of this will help you, or will make a difference for you where you should fit, and on the personality, your priorities. So do you need structure? Are you someone who's comfortable with structure or no structure, which we will cover? What is your tolerance to hierarchy? So sometimes when you have a lot of hierarchy, it can actually slow down decision making, but it can also help you with getting support, but it can also slow down innovation. Do you have needs of job security? Which benefits matter to you the most? But I think now that these benefits are becoming pretty much available in many places, but something to think, and your room for growth and opportunity. So if you work for a startup, it's probably very easy to move and grow, to go from a contributor to maybe a specialist, to a manager, to maybe a director. When you're a Rogers, it's really hard to go from manager to director. Very hard to go from director to vice president. They have all these layers, and they have like very, very specific things that you have to do to achieve. So moving may be very, very difficult. So all these things are things for you to consider, but they come with benefits too. So let's start the structure, organizational behavior. There were two, I believe, chapters from a book that I found on Humber that I've used for inspiration. And now we're going to switch to structure. We've been talking about structure, but we're going to break it down in pieces. So the structure is one of the independent variables that influence very much the organizational behavior. So when we say independent variable, there's a lot of things that will depend on structure. For success, for performance, and then the structure will have an effect on the individual variables, and the people will have effect on structure as well. But usually your structure is pretty much, when you come to business, the structure is in place. You may have to make some changes. You may want to make some changes, because structures, you would think, do evolve over time. They also need to adjust, but it's harder. They're hard to move. The structures are very difficult to change and difficult to move. Think of them as your foundation for your houses, or a car. A car has a structure. You will come to a business that has structure that you will have to probably live with, but you'll need to see how you can influence it. The group effect is very important, and will interact with the structure. And obviously there's a structure variable. So let's talk more about structure. But I think this is a good reminder about organizational behavior. We said it's about people, it's about group, and it's about the structure, and then how they interact together, and then paying attention and monitoring and measuring and testing to see how we improve a business performance, so that people are happy, people stay, people don't go on absenteeism, that we've learned it's about $16 billion. So you will come to business that has structure. So what is an organizational structure? That was a question that I had for the class. But because I really want to make sure that we cover the content, we can have questions at the end. A structure is it is any component of the organization that can have an impact on your work. So, and I'll detail what the structure is, but it's a big piece of the equation of success or no success that will maybe make things better, difficult, or harder. And I think Lucy faced some of that at Rogers. She faced the hierarchy. She felt the silo. She felt about only speaking to the level of the same people that are at the same level as you. She talked about the processes as well, and the roles and the responsibility, and the resistance as well. A structure is the foundation of how a company is organized. It suggests formality in terms of authority, who has authority and who can decide, and who's in command. We'll see more of that. But regardless, all departments have to function in a coordinated manner to achieve their organizational objective. But if you don't have a structure that will help you and facilitate that, you may actually all fail, or some of you will face more challenges than other. And sometimes the lack of structure may actually be confined to specific departments or one or two departments. So maybe the business overall is actually doing good, but there are departments that are not properly structured. And what do we mean by this? This now is what we are just about to go in more details. But again, and I said at the beginning, it's really hard when we talk about structure, business types, and how are they different, and how do they overlap with values, there's not one way, but we're back now to formal and informal. So you may have a structure that is more formal and a structure that is not as formal, which also is one way that we can divide up on the business types. But don't get too caught up on the terminologies, but try to understand what's behind them is very more important. And think back to when you design or when you try to understand what a user really means by something. Even if they tell you, you're going to try to understand what they're thinking and what they understand that thing. So let's formal and informal is back with us. The formal organization will have objectives. The informal organization do not necessarily have a specified structure. So when you hear formal, you may think that they have a structure. When you hear informal, they may not have structure. A structure can be formal or informal. So you can have structure being hierarchy, or you may be very flat as well in terms of businesses. So you may not have hierarchy and everything goes to one person usually, which is the CEO, the owner. And doesn't matter what you say, if people are not happy, they're just going to run to him, they're going to cry, and then he's going to make decisions that you're probably going to be happy or not happy with. But sometimes decisions are made fast because you have just to go to him and you don't have to go through all the layers. But advantages and disadvantages in what you're comfortable with. Formal structure will have hierarchy with people at each level, and in informal organization, people at low level reports to higher managers. So there is more of that fine reporting line. But what I have done for you is I have split more about when we say structure, or what are some of the elements that we can actually put words to that are part of a structure. So when we say organizational structure, and that is based on my definitions, but also from reading when people talk about structure, and even in the book, how the words that they use to actually define structure, I think will revolve around these terminologies. So 100% owned or partially. So the company structure, who owns the business, as we've said, public, private. So if I'm private, I own the business, but I may not own it 100%. I may own it 100%, or I may own it partially. And partially can be in any percentages. So Sunwing 50-51, 49-51. So I think 51 is TUE, the company in the UK, or it's versa. But that will make a big difference on who's also deciding and what you can do, and how you can be transparent as well, and what you need to say and what you don't have to say. And if you're hiding things, then that means people know you're hiding things. Let's say that you're hiding things that you don't. Then maybe hiding is okay. We're going to talk about culture. Maybe hiding is okay because we hide it as a business. Maybe there's something has happened that we don't want our investor to know, or we don't want the public to know. So we're kind of telling the employee it's okay to hide things, but then some people may not know when it's okay and when it's not okay, and then they think that hiding is accepted. So it's these little things can actually really cascade in and make a big difference. Centralized, decentralized. So whether a business is centrally managed, so all decisions, let's say you have a headquarter in Toronto, but you have offices in Vancouver. So you may have, you may decide that all decisions are centralized. Brand, the UX, the user experience, the strategy, all the budgets. So everything will be through Toronto, and Toronto will tell Vancouver how much money they get and what they need to do to be able to get to move, bring the performance that they need. Or you may have decentralized model that is almost like you're operating on your own, but you're still owned by a big business. That will make a huge differences on who decides, who is accountable, who's responsible, maybe the teams, where the team is located, where people are located. So, and that may be easy for for certain situations, and may be very difficult for certain situations as well. So let's say that you're working as UX and you need to do a customer research, and you are on your own in Vancouver, and research is in Vancouver. There's a research in Montreal, but they do their own. If you're decentralized, you're probably going to go faster. But if all research and all decision has to go through Montreal, then when you have an idea, you have to get their approval. When you have an idea, you have to get them. When you need money, you need to get them. So do you see where it may make your job fun or more difficult? Strategy. Some businesses have no strategy, as some businesses have. So we're going to talk about strategy. And when I've looked at business and structure and our OB, organizational behavior, I've created these subtopics because I feel that these are topics, or these are the areas that you need to be familiar with the most, because they will affect you, and that they affect behavior and organizational behavior as a whole, and performance, which is what we're discussing. Structure. Objectives. Do we have objectives? Don't we have clear objectives? Do we have common objectives? So Sarah talked about having common objective, but everybody wants to have common objective. In reality, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have conflicting objectives, and sometimes they're not even being measured on the same objectives. So some businesses will have, at the beginning of the year, they'll say everybody needs to improve all online sales per 10%, and that is everybody's business. Now, that means everybody and all the VPs and all the director, all the managers have to go to the team and say, our objective is we all have to increase sales by 10%. And then they'll say, Sarah, what are you going to do to meet your 10%? They're going to say, Brett, what are you going to do to meet your 10%? Thomas, what are you going to do to meet your 10%? We all come to the same. And then we know, and often we're going to work together on the same objective, or even activities that we think that we want to plan. That is an ideal world. But even then, there'll be clashes. Then if that does not exist, that some people are going to have conflicting objectives. So maybe you're trying to improve sales for 10%, but then you have IT who's trying to cost down by 20% and 50%, and they try in every time that you have a new idea for innovation, or a new idea for a new technology to bring in, they're going to say, no, I'm asked not to spend. So this is where you guys are in conflicting, and then you get upset, because you're trying to increase your salary and you're nervous because you're not going to meet your target, and you're not going to get your bonus, you're not going to get your salary increase. Bang, we clash. This happens. So how do you do this? You have to align. And then every year you get objectives, and you have to sit down and make sure that the objectives are aligned. But it has to start from the top as well. And what you will find is sometimes the VPs are like this too. They're not even aligned on the objectives, but very, very important. So when your boss, or if your boss says we need to have common objective, and what it means and how important it is, it's really, really, really important for multiple reasons. But if there are no objectives, then ask as well. So this is, I think, an important part. This is session open, and we are at 1:25, so this is the end. But I think it's important. The things you learn in class, like this, what is a good structure, and how a structure can have an impact, and when we say strategy or objective, if you come to a business and you notice that there's no clear strategy for your department, or if there's no clear objective for the business, talk to your boss and say, how do we define our strategy? How do we define our objectives? Think of our project at Roots. What are we trying to do right now? We're trying to understand, what are we going to do? What is the strategy? What is the objective for our project? Who are our customer? Where are we going to be focusing? What are our priorities? So, and it's not existent. Yes, Roots has a strategy, obviously, But we are building it, we're defining it because we know it's going to be important. Otherwise, we can do anything. I could be looking at the websites and look at mobile apps and look at many things, but maybe it's not a priority, or maybe we're not all aligned. So we have to have a common objective and agree on what we're going to be doing and where we're going to be focusing, then and what the strategy is. So we know we're getting more sense. We're talking about mobile responsive, and I haven't had a chance to share everything with you, but we're aligning with Roots. What is Roots trying to do? Why are they doing this big project? Where do we align? How do we add value? We're trying to help and do things or bring things that they're not aware of to help them with that objective. But we are trying to align. And then I keep saying we bring adding value and helping them for something that they're already engaged with. That is aligning on strategy. That is aligning on objective. That is even aligning on the consumer or the competitor. Who are the competitor? And we try to bring more insights to maybe make them think about competitors. And this is really adding value. So we are trying to do this. We're in that step of strategy and objective. Now, that comes with challenges, right? That means until yesterday or even today, and we're going to talk more about it tomorrow. Sometimes we're still like, where are we going? Where is this project? What is the project? We used to have a deadline, a specific assignment, and know when, and this is it. And then all that you have to worry is about delivering that deliverable. But we don't know all these things because we need answers from Roots, so we're trying to define. So I know some of you feel very uncomfortable, but I will tell you, this is real business. You're not going to have all of these things. So I talk about structure, but you're going to come to a business, they might not all have these items. You're going to have to feel comfortable and learn to navigate and then decide, where do I begin as well? And what can I do? And the things that my teams would drive me nuts with my previous team or teams at Sunwing was often they would say, well, no one has decided, we're waiting for someone. And I would go, no, there's no waiting, then do it, run with it, right? Owning and so that you can bring structure. So 128, we can continue very quickly tomorrow, but I think we don't have too many slides left. And you can also read the slides. And then tomorrow we're going to be meeting with Roots. We're gonna have a kickoff and we can talk projects. Tomorrow we're gonna talk about our projects and where we're at, what we've done, and to continue to do what you do. Be engaged, be involved. Look at the file in the folder. And Sarah is our project manager. And I'm sure if you have any questions or anybody has questions about where to put things and what to put in certain folder, I think Sarah will be the good place. And we have our team leads as well that have volunteer. Thank you. And I feel that we have a good momentum. We're moving, but Roots is a big machine. We are a team that is forming. So it's normal to feel that maybe we don't have everything outlined for us, but we are defining it. So and I do appreciate your patience. I hope you enjoyed today's sessions. And if there are any questions, I'm around. I can still stick around for a bit. If anybody wants to ask me any questions, I'm around as well right now. So I'll make myself available, and you're welcome to stay. And otherwise, go and do your other occupations, and we'll see you tomorrow. So I hope you'll have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Yves. And just to confirm, our meeting with